Let's talk a bit about race relations in Guyana and Trinidad. Hi again, Caribbeanologists. Today I'm back with another video, and this video is about, as you can tell by the topic or the title, this is about race relations in Guyana and Trinidad. Now I'm including Trinidad even though I'm not going to really touch much in Trinidad because I'm not too intimate with information about that country in terms of its race relations, even though I do know, but I would have to depend more on books and going an academic route when it comes to that, being that I have no, I guess you can say first-hand knowledge or first-hand information or have experience in hearing or seeing anything about race relations in Trinidad, even though they do mirror and parallel those that you find in Guyana. The reason why Guyana is going to be my primary focus here, and I guess what I'm going to say about Guyana can also be applied to Trinidad, it's because I have a wife who's from Guyana, and I've been to Guyana 7 times. And in that respect, I've become very, very, very fascinated by the topic. It is very fascinating. It's disheartening, but it's still very fascinating. And it's a case study in just humanity, basically. Our flaws and our good things. Speaking of good things, I did a video in Guyana the other day, and it was titled "The Hot Mess That Is Guyana." Now I know that title may have been somewhat sensational, and I know it may have offended some people, but I just wanted to clarify something here. This is not to put a criticism on Guyana per se, or that I dislike Guyana or have a problem with Guyana. No, I don't. Again, my wife is from there, and I love Guyana. It is one of the more beautiful places I've been to. And beauty, I know, means different things to different people, but I just love and appreciate Guyana. I always feel relaxed there. I always feel at home. It's always a place that I want to go to. So the country is beautiful. It has wonderful people. I've had wonderful experiences there. And for whatever people may talk about in terms of putting it down in certain regards, I just love it. I can live there all year long. I can deal with the power outages, the mosquitoes, the heat. I just love the environment. I love the electricity that I feel when I go there. I just love seeing the open areas. But then again, that's just me. I just love that type of stuff. So this video, despite the fact that or the previous video where I said Guyana is a hot mess, I was speaking about a couple of things in particular. And this video, it is not, again, to go ahead knocking Guyana as a country or knocking everyone in Guyana. It's just that this is a part of the fabric of their society that I believe holds it back from seeing its full and true potential. Anyway, in terms of race relations in Guyana, the 2 largest groups there are obviously people of East Indian descent that they call Indo-Guyanese, and people of African descent that they call Afro-Guyanese. Of course, there are other groups of people, but those 2 are the largest groups. Now, for people who live outside of Guyana, you may get the impression that like I did at one point in my life, well, this is years ago, I thought everyone that came from Guyana actually were Indo-Guyanese. I was not even aware that there were Afro-Guyanese. And I want to say years ago, I'm talking about just my first knowledge of Guyana when I was in my teens, basically, because the majority of people I came across who said they were from Guyana were Indo-Europeans. I now know better, of course, all these years later. I've known better for quite some time right now, so this is not something I just happened to find out just last week. But in regard to both of these groups, there have been tensions, there have been frictions, and it has carried all the way down to this day and age. And when you go to Guyana, you don't see it. You see people just going about their normal business. You see people of East Indian heritage talking to people of Afro-Guyanese heritage. You see them sometimes dating, sometimes they have children with one another, sometimes they're in business with one another. You just see people going about their normal business. There's not anything going on that will indicate that you can say, wow, these groups hate each other, these groups have a problem with each other. And I want to say, for the most part, that is not even the case. But bring elections into the picture, and all of a sudden, the racial tension and the divisions bubble to the top, rise to the top. And with this last election cycle that they had, I saw some things on Facebook. I saw some comments on both sides where they're just basically going after each other. And you hear some vile things being said. And I was just like, wow, this is interesting. But I had known before this why this goes on. And in order to understand today what is going on, you've got to go back some time into history. Now again, this is not an academic video where I'm quoting any great scholars from Guyana, any psychiatrist or whatever to explain all of this. This is just basically my observation and from things that I have come to learn and come to understand. I'm also not Guyanese, obviously. I'm from the Virgin Islands. So I know some people may look at me and say, hey, you're not an authority to be talking about Guyana, so I don't want to listen to anything you have to say. Still, it's not going to stop me. I'm just going to go ahead and do this video anyway. Well, first of all, a couple of things that you have to understand is that the Dutch were the first Europeans to actually colonize the land that would be called Guyana today. Eventually, that land came under the ownership, or I guess you can say the governance of the British Crown, somewhere in the early 1800s when it became British Guyana. As it came British Guyana, the British ended slavery in their empire in 1834. Now, a lot of people hear that and think that was it. Slavery just happened, just ended promptly on a particular day in August in the British Empire. By decree, yes, it was over with. But in practice, it still continued on. Because in the British Empire, what happened, at least in the British Caribbean, slavery came to an end in August of 1834. But it wasn't like the enslaved population could just walk off the plantations. There was a period, I think a 4 or 6 year period, that was supposed to be for apprenticeship. The way it was supposed to be on paper were that the former slave owners were supposed to prepare and prep their enslaved populations for the world out there once they were released from the plantations. Needless to say, a lot of these planters, these slave owners, took advantage of the situation and still tried to squeeze out the last bit of labor they could get out of their enslaved population for those 4 to 6 years. The only Caribbean island that did not go through this period of apprenticeship was actually the island of Antigua. All the other British territories, all the other British colonies had to go ahead and deal with this period of apprenticeship. During that time, former enslaved Africans and their descendants were still persecuted, still harassed, still forced to work. And if they did not work or go through with this apprenticeship, which they were not getting paid for anyway, they could be punished severely, tortured in some cases. In some parts of the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Guyana, I don't know where else in the British Empire, even after slavery ended, there was something called waterhouses. So if you did not stay on the plantation to do what you were supposed to do, they had police who would round you up and bring you to this place called a waterhouse where they would torture you and punish you for not doing work. Now remember, slavery has come to an end, but you're still here under this apprenticeship and you're supposed to go ahead and still work and give your labor to these former slave owners. This is what was going on. It was during this point, or toward the tail end of this point, the British realizing that, okay, this apprenticeship period is coming to an end, we need to find another source of labor. They looked toward India. They looked to some other places, obviously, but nothing came about it as much as when they found a whole group of a labor force in India, which had just come under the British control. Now, when they went to India to bring these people over, East Indians that is, there were a couple of things going on over there in India that I consider to be push factors to get people in India to say, I would like to get up and move to some other part of the world I've never been to seek a better life. When the British moved in, the British factory system basically brought an end to a lot of local industries in India. They really hurt a lot of the everyday people. Not to mention the everyday people, a lot of them were poor, impoverished, had nothing really going for them. So when the British came in and say, hey, listen, we would like to invite you to come over to the other end of the world, places like Mauritius in the Indian Ocean, places like South America, and of course Guyana, Trinidad, and a couple of other Caribbean islands. Come on over to these places. You can get a better life, make more pay. You're not going to be in slavery. You can bring your family. You can keep your religion. You can keep your religious practices. And we have laws to go ahead and protect you. This sounded so appealing to many people on the Indian subcontinent. They said, hey, we'll go. What do we have to lose? Jumped on the boats, came over to Guyana and Trinidad. When they came over, initially, they were very, very ill-treated. They found out it was not the bed of roses that they were promised. They came over, find themselves going through a whole lot of nonsense to the point where an appeal was made back to the British government to basically put a halt on the import of these East Indians, for the British government to take a look to see what were these abuses all about. Anyway, it stopped for a moment, and then it started all up again. During this time also, the Portuguese came in, I think some Chinese and so forth also came into to these former British slave islands. So after this transpired, you have Africans or African descendants who were once slaves, who were once enslaved, I should say. And they're there, and they're standing on the sidelines basically watching this new group come in. So if the Africans had any leverage to go to the British government and say, listen, you need to compensate us for these 300 years of exploitation, abuse, oppression, they lost their leverage when these East Indians started coming in to fill the workforce, to fill the labor force. Now, what the white Europeans did, they basically used to say that when the Africans did not want to continue in slavery under the guise of apprenticeship, they would say, see, they're lazy. They don't want to work. Look at how they're standing around. They don't want to work. They don't want to give us their free labor. So we're just going to label them as being lazy. So now these Africans are standing on the sidelines. They have no leverage. This new group of people come in. As they come in, these people are protected by certain laws, certain things the British planters could not do to them because there were laws governing the way this was done. I'm not saying there weren't some abuses here and there, mind you, and I'm not saying their work was not hard, but they were protected under certain laws. They were able, like I said before, to come intact as a family if they wanted to. They were able to keep their religion. They were able to keep their names. They were able to keep their religious practices. And then they were also protected by law. All of these things, the Africans, when they were in slavery, did not have. The Africans came over. They were kidnapped. They were sold, brought over to the New World and to the Americas. Their names were taken away from them. Their religions were suppressed. They could not follow their religious practices. They were considered evil, demonic, their religion and their religious practices. Those things were suppressed. They could not express themselves based on their religions that they had back in Africa. Their whole family structure was broken up. Sometimes from the time they left Africa, as a son or a daughter was ripped away from a family, kidnapped, dragged off, never to see Africa again, never to see their family again. So they come over completely abandoned, just on their own. Sometimes it could have been a brother and a sister, but when they came over, they were separated and sent to different colonies. So the Africans were not afforded the same thing. And they went through 200 to 300 years of dehumanizing exploitation. Contrast that with the East Indians who come over, family intact, religion intact, keep your names, you're protected by law. So who do you think had a better leg up to move towards progress and upward mobility? Which group you think was going to do better at the start? Keep that in mind. Here's another thing that happened. When the East Indians came over and came over to over to this side of the world, to these British colonies, there were roads built. Because the Africans, when they were enslaved, they humanized Guyana and Trinidad. They added the human element to these two places. They built the roads. They built the canals. They built the homes. They built the cities. They built the towns. They built the dams, the back dams, the cokers. They did the dredging in Guyana and so forth. So by the time the East Indians came, these places were pretty much ready-made for them. The East Indians only came to work on the plantations that were there. They didn't have to build anything. They just came over, here's a cane plantation, work on it. The Africans came over, they had to build, rip up, tear up, put this together, do all of that work. Of course, yeah, the Dutch were the engineering minds behind it, but they weren't the ones doing the work. So the East Indians had all these things already in place for them. So when you look at Guyana, when you look at Trinidad, when you look at the roads that people drive on today, those initial roads were built on the back, the blood, the sweat, the tears of African labor, free African labor, I might add, at the punishment of a whip or torture. So again, when the East Indians came in and met the Africans that were there, understand the two groups were not on the same playing field. They were not on the same level. I'm not talking about intelligence or anything like that, mind you. I'm just talking about the East Indians came with certain protections and certain things intact that kept their family unit together. That they could, because you ask any black person today, just about any black person, name your great-great-great-grandfather from Africa. They can't tell you. But you can have East Indians can say, hey, yes, this is my mother, and this is my grandmother, and this is my great-grandmother, and they came from this part of India and so forth. Today, if black people don't pull up ancestry DNA, they cannot even determine which part of Africa they came from. And even after then, they can't find any family members unless someone in Africa does a DNA test, and probably they can match up somewhere along that line. But that's about the only way we black people can actually figure that type of stuff out, or even begin to start to figure that out. So, with that in mind, the East Indians basically had a better leg up to get going. And here was another thing. Do you know that during the indentured servant period, one of the things that was also done to keep them, because the indentured servant process was supposed to be like this. You came over for 7 years, you gave your labor, and I guess giving your labor paid off your debt, and after 7 years, you could leave and go back to India. But the British didn't exactly want to do that, so only a few of them ever returned back to India. The overwhelming majority decided to stay. And they stayed because, number one, I'm not going to go back over there. Number two, I have children over here now. I've acclimated to the land. I'm not going back on this long 9,000 mile journey back to India. But what the planters also did, they sweetened the deal and say, hey, listen, if you stick around, man, I'll give you some land. I'll give you this piece of land over here, this plot of land. The Africans were not afforded that type of stuff when they came out of slavery. They were afforded nothing. So right off the bat, the East Indians can go ahead now and, hey, I have a piece of land. I'll build something on this. And then my family can take it over, and it can pass down from generation to generation. The African descendants, the Africans didn't have that. They didn't get that. I am not saying that you may not have one or two nice former slave owners who may have left some land or property to their beloved slave or slaves. But for the most part, that wasn't required. That was not something that they were doing. The East Indians, on the other hand, those were things that sweetened the deal to keep them around.
Not to mention the fact they could go back to India if they wanted to. The Africans couldn't go back to Africa. Where? Where were they going to go back to? 10 generations in, they don't know anything about where they came from. So again, the playing fields were not the same at the start. And the British played off these tensions between each group. And as they did in other parts, like in Africa, they generally favored one group over another. In this case, they tend to favor the lighter skinned Indian, even though there are dark skinned Indians. Not to mention the fact that there are East Indians who came from India, where in their country, they also look down on the darker skinned Indians as being inferior to them, less evil, bad things. They're that color because of such and such. So they already had that mindset over there that things black, people black, are considered something is wrong with them. And they come over and they meet a whole country full of black people, or a whole colony full of black people. What do you think is going through their minds? And then it's through all of this and the suspicions from both sides. You know, the Africans looking at those new people coming over and taking their spot, taking their positions, getting a better treatment than they are. So there's a level of suspicion, a level of envy, a level of jealousy. And then the East Indians looking over at the Africans. Yeah, you see, they're lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to this, they don't want to that. Something that the white man put in their heads or labeled the Africans. See, they don't want to work. That's why we're giving you the job. Those words, that stereotype, that belief has carried all the way down to this very time. I think somewhere along the line there was a film somewhere back when in Trinidad somewhere where an East Indian person actually called black people black dogs. And just recently there was a video in Guyana with some college student, East Indian, who basically said the same thing. Now, I'm not putting it all in East Indians, mind you, because you can hear Afro-Guyanese or Afro-Trinis probably saying some really negative, pejorative, stereotypical, racist things about East Indians also. But the two groups have been at each other's throats. Right now, it's latent. You know, it comes out during politics, or somewhere in quiet talk somewhere, you hear the hush words. They're dogs, they're this, they're that. Oh, those coolie people over there, they're this, they're that. Oh, the black people, they're thieves. They're lazy. And then you hear, oh, those coolie people, they're this and they're that and whatever. You hear those type of things going on. And the one thing that a lot of these people don't realize is that their common enemy was actually the white man, actually the British, who exploited both groups in different ways, mind you, but exploited both groups, played them off against one another, and left them fighting and arguing with one another. Which to me, as I said at the opening, this is one of the reasons I believe that Guyana has been held back. There are other reasons, mind you, but it does not help when you have racial division. Trinidad has fared better, or a little bit better, in terms of their race relations and it not basically holding back their country. But in Guyana, it's somewhat blatant when elections come around and it's split right down the middle. And you could see East Indians, this group, black folks, this group. Not saying that you probably don't have people from both sides in either of the major parties, mind you, but it's usually straight down the line. Elections come about, you hear all the racial tension just bubbling back up again. And right now, because of the discovery of oil in Guyana, it even comes out even more because each group thinks that if the other group gets into power and controls the oil revenue, that group is going to go ahead and help out their group and leave the other group in the dust. So that has not helped matters at all. But anyway, I just want to just basically bring this out. Now, there's more others can say, there are more other people can add. And again, I was not here trying to knock one group over the other. I was just trying to give a little bit of a history to bring those who don't understand what's going on down there. And again, I'm not a professor, so people might look at me and like, who the hell is this guy talking about, you know, or what he's talking about. But hopefully it could spark some discussion. And for those people who have not gone to Guyana, and I'm like a middleman, you know, where I am from another part of the Caribbean, where I have Caribbean friends from Jamaica, from Antigua, from St. Kitts, all these different places who know nothing about Guyana, they may go ahead and say, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting to know. That's what I really wanted to bring about. Guyanese may get mad at me, but for my other people that are watching this video, I hope that I made some sense, and I hope I put some things into perspective, and I hope I brought an understanding or something you may not have even known. I hope I brought it to your attention. Okay? This is for discussion. You can go down into the comment section and you can definitely go ahead and tell me your thoughts about this. You can like the video. You can dislike the video. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. You can come in and cuss me out. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. Okay? I generally go ahead and respond to people when they come into my videos and they comment. You can also share this video if you figure it could help somebody out, or it could spark some discussion in your chat rooms or your groups or your Facebook page or wherever you may have it. But most of all, I would like you to also subscribe to the channel, okay? I try to bring out these videos. Obviously, this is Caribbeanology, so we're going to discuss things Caribbean or relating to the Caribbean and so forth, okay? Thank you for sticking all the way to the end of this video. I really, really appreciate it, okay? So you guys take care. This is Caribbeanology. Until the next video.